This cutie patootie desperately needed a hand-sewn dress. Say what you will about a Labubu, but they're joyful, they're campy, and they're whimsical. I hope this project inspires you to grab a needle and thread, cultivate some whimsy, and remember what your hands can do. This project was a delightful diversion as I prepped and recovered from a thankfully successful surgery. I made a dress that would complement this linen dress that my husband had stitched for me as a comfy recovery dress during that time period. So I grabbed the scraps and my tools and got to stitching. I've got basic tools, my little embroidery scissors, of course a pin cushion, and I think I'm going to use this linen thread for sewing. Wax for linen, a size 9 sharp needle. I push the needle through the fabric with this finger, and so I always wear a thimble on the finger that I push the needle through. To cut out the pieces, I utilize my 18th century mantua making skills and just drape the fabric on the body and cut out rectangles and squares. But instead of fabric, I used tissue because it was the perfect weight. Thank goodness for the straight lines on plaid and gingham, making it easy to cut and mismatch the pattern. The Labubu was also just another rectangular piece of fabric. I'm going to hem all 3 sides, and then I'm going to whip stitch the short ends to make a circle. Because this is linen, I don't think I need to baste up. And by basting, what I mean is by folding this up and then potentially doing a little stitch. Instead, I think I'm just going to do a double fold, and I'm going to do kind of half of the stripe, roughly. Pull that up, push that through. Make sure this loop is hanging out nicely. Right there, okay. Because I was exhausted, I spent a fair amount of time stitching in my office bed. And once I got the 3 sides hemmed, then I could fold it right sides together and do a little whip stitch. I didn't have to hem that 4th side because it was actually the selvage, so it was already finished. Doing a whip stitch on an already finished edge, like a hem, creates a beautiful flat seam. I made the seam the center front of the bow, and then I did a very long running stitch up that seam, so then I could gather it down into a cute little bow. When you pull on a running stitch, it shrinks the fabric down, and so then I could just stitch through that and then open up the bow, and voila! The skirt has 2 flat felled seams and is hemmed at the bottom. The first felled seam, I chose to use the selvage and then a raw edge. So what you're seeing here is I'm staggering my seam, right sides together, lining up the plaid, and then I'm staggering it the width of the finished seam allowance. I'm using a reverse back stitch to first hold the 2 pieces of fabric together. So I'm stitching left to right when I do that as a right-handed person. If you want to practice this technique, I have a tutorial on my channel and it's called Another Way to Backstitch. The reason I like to use it is because on the other side, it looks like a nice, pretty backstitch with the dashes next to one another. To make your seam flat, you have to first open it up and then you fold over your finished edge, be it a selvage or a folded edge. I'm utilizing the selvage here, so what I did was open the seam, folded that selvage over, and now I'm felling that into place. I'm felling it from the inside of the skirt, so this is the finished inside, this is the finished outside. I moved on to hemming the skirt, and you can see here how I'm using my lap as a work table. I'm using my right hand to hold the fabric down, and then I'm using my left hand to fold the fabric up as I stitch with my right hand. Now to gather the skirt so that it fits the bodice. I took the thread and I measured out the length of the entire skirt and then added a little bit of a tail. I decided to use a machine polyester thread for my gathering stitches, and I started at the back of the skirt and I went all the way around with one single thread. I think I did about 6 stitches to the inch, and I did 2 rows of running stitches, about 1/8 of an inch down from one another, matching the center back with the center back of the bodice and then the center front. I then pulled my gathering threads at the same tension and made the skirt the same width as the bodice. Once I figured out the right dimension, I then arranged my little gathers so that they were even. Next was attaching the skirt to the bodice. I decided to do it from the outside. So I took the bodice and I folded the raw edges in and pinned it to the skirt. And then I used a space back stitch and I attached it like I used to do when I stitched 18th century gowns. I love how the skills are so transmutable. And who knew that it made such a cute wrist ruffle? Next up were the straps. I took 2 widths of the stripes and then I folded the raw edges in on themselves and folded it in half, hot dog wise. To hold the straps in place, I decided to use a little back stitch that essentially looks like a cute top stitch. Did I overstitch these straps? 100%. But I think it looks super cute, and anytime that stitching is really visible, I am all for it. Attaching the straps was really straightforward. I just put the right sides together and then did a butted seam by whipping all the pieces together. The only part that was a little bit weird is that there were a lot of layers to catch, but I was just trying to catch the top section of them so that when the strap was opened up, it was perfectly flat. I decided to use some small snaps to fasten the center back skirt in place and then also to attach the front straps to the front of the bodice. As the instructions stated, I first marked the location and I stitched the ball half of the snap fastener on the underside of the overlap. I stitched this firmly with several small stitches in a fan shape, making sure that you go through each of the little holes of the snap. And I did this several times just for security's sake. I didn't go through all the layers. I just went through probably the first 2 layers of the waistband. Then I pushed a pin through the hole in the ball to mark the location of the socket section. And then I slipped the socket over a pin and stitched that into place. Once again, using smaller stitches through those little holes and fanning it out around the entire snap, not going through all the layers just because the waistband is super thick. Again, probably the first 2 layers, I would say. Now, these snaps are not intended for really heavy-duty use, so putting these snaps on, say, a doll dress or a Labubu dress was really the perfect application. I also added snaps on the front of the straps, making it a lot easier to put on. I added 2 little buttons to the front to make it appear as though the straps are buttoned on. I was so happy that I found the perfect sized small buttons that also were a good color. To attach the buttons, I just stitched through the entire width of the fabric, stab stitching, going back and forth through the holes, probably about 6 times, I would say. Since they're decorative, I didn't have to worry too much about them being overly secure, but I still wanted there to be enough thread so that that was part of the visual effect. Always let the light in, even when it's a little bit tricky. So go ahead and puncture that darkness with your sewing needle, your knitting needle, your crochet hook. Even a pinhole of light can get you through a dark moment. The techniques used in this video are listed down below in the description, so go ahead and take a look and click on those and practice. I hope that this inspires you to pick up a needle and thread, and as always, remember what your hands can do.